Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to NFL Live Before Lock. Very exciting day for all of us sports fans with the first NFL game of the season. We got a great one. Chiefs versus Texans. I'm Alex Baker, joined today by Kyle Dvorchak. Kyle, how's it going, man?
It's good. It's been easily the weirdest offseason ever. I didn't know if we would make it at some points, but we made it, and we made it to what should be a sick game. Last year, we were talking before the show. You were getting hyped up for what ended up being a horrible kickoff game for the season. I don't think we'll have what it was Bears-Packers. I don't think we'll have such a dud. Even if the Chiefs, end up blowing out Houston, it should still be a fun game.
Definitely. I mean, we got two of the top QBs in the league. Watson, fresh off his newly minted $1 trillion contract, so maybe we see a little bump there. But we got a little bit of news. So everyone was looking at Brandon Cooks for the Texans. He was their new sign this year, and he was questionable with a quad, but he's in. Now, in NFL, there's 16 games a season, so it's not quite like MLB or NBA where guys are playing only if they're fully healthy. So let's just start off. What do you make of this injury? Because that's going to determine a little bit about how we approach our lineups.
Yeah, so in theory, I think these receivers suffering soft tissue injuries is quite a bad situation going into any given week. There's been studies that show that is a downgrade on their production. But I do think we're gonna get the ownership decrease, and I think it could be pretty massive given that early. If you set your lineup at, I'll call it noon, you thought there was a decent chance he didn't even play. So in theory, maybe it hurts him, but in practice, all he needs is one long touchdown. There's so much variance that goes into one game. So on the whole, injured guy is not good, but in a game theory perspective, you have to at least consider it.
Definitely. I mean, Brandon Cooks, he's not even really a top target if he's fully healthy today, because we got one of the best offenses in the league across from him. And as you're saying, maybe he gets a little bit of an ownership decrease because of that Q tag. So definitely that compensates a little bit for the injury. Something to be aware of. Maybe if you're on the fence about him in the first place, that could be one reason to swap off. The inactives, no one really stuck out to me. Ricky Seals-Jones, Kiki Kuti active. So if you're thinking that maybe they'd be sneaky, then don't go there tonight. But mostly this slate is pretty much guys we're familiar with, not too many rookies. Well, let's talk about some strategy just overall before we get going. So what's your general take on Showdown and how you build your lineups? Because one of the big differences is you don't have to roster guys of certain positions. You got to pick the positions you play.
Yeah, so I actually just dropped this on Awesemo recently. I think it was this morning or yesterday, basically breaking down. It was somewhere north of 40 Showdown lineups over last year. Nolan Kelly, a huge effort as well, pitching in. This is a lot of data to gather. So basically what I'm looking for is I'm trying to get what we would think of as your typical flex positions. For me, it's receiver and running back. I'm trying to get those guys in captain. One thing I found that was maybe the most interesting nugget is if you reduce your guys' captain price back down to their normalized for being the flex, they're only your third most expensive guy once you take that 1.5x off. So what that tells me is that I'm trying to get in a mid-tier, essentially 1 week breakout guy, a guy maybe you on this slate, you call him Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Will Fuller. And that gives you access to dip back in and get more elite players. In games with high totals, I think that is almost absolutely what I'm trying to do, is find Patrick Mahomes is going to produce more than just one incredible player. And it doesn't have to necessarily be Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. There are going to be other guys when you play with Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson, to his credit too, that break out that in one game aren't particularly high owned and aren't crazy expensive. So you want to fit in a lot of studs in flex, at least probably I'd call it 2 stud type players in flex, and get a little bit of a mid-range guy in that captain spot, especially, like I said, in a very high total game. What was it, 56 and a half open at? Not sure what we're at right now based on line movement, but one of the highest total of the week. Supposed to be an electric game. Beyond that, once you get higher totals, you generally want to spend more of your overall salary, was something I found that was kind of interesting. I'm guessing that is just due to when you have a game with 39 total and no one's going to do well, it really anything can happen. It doesn't matter what you do. When you have a game with the 56 total, you want to get more studs in. So I'm looking for running back, receiver. Most often, quarterback shows up in the winning lineup a decent amount of time, but not enough for me to make it a specific priority. I'm looking for what we call traditional flex as my captain, and then I'm trying to get studs in. And generally, the like we talked about it, your Ricky Seals-Jones or Kiki Kuti, if you were looking at those guys, don't typically pan out. I want to say it was between like 10 and 15% that a guy in the winning lineup ends up being less than $1,000 in cap space. So those guys can happen. I think like Anthony Berkshire was a great example, a guy who got like average like consistently one catch from Anthony Berkshire. So it made sense when he was like 400 price, like maybe in playoffs or whatever it was. Outside of those very like easy to spot scenarios, I'm going with like a linear construction, and my third most expensive guy is in my captain when you normalize for him being 1.5x.
Nice. Yeah, that's definitely an interesting strategy where maybe like pivoting off some of the most popular captains to get a little bit of ownership decrease. And we have ownership projections on the site. I hand the paywall so you can see what everyone's ownership is. Now, the most popular captain probably is going to be Patrick Mahomes. So we have about 1 in 5 lineups. The tricky part is like with the QBs at captain, the chance of them being the highest scorer of the slate really depends on how much they spread around the ball. Like if you take Aaron Rodgers, he's less likely to be the highest scoring player because so much of his production is concentrated in Devontae Adams. When you have Mahomes, you're mentioning he spreads it out a lot. You got Kelsey, Hill, a couple of other guys. That makes it more possible for him to be the highest scoring player. And I have him with the best odds of being the highest scoring player of 25%. This is all on this free article I have on the site, the top showdown plays. So make sure to check that out. Of course, he's the most expensive too. So like it's not exactly like you can just plug in Mahomes and lock and load. But I was finding lineups today are very easy to make on DraftKings. I was seeing a lot of Mahomes captain, Kelsey, Hill, all in the same lineup when I did my crunch. So, I mean, it's going to be tough because like you can build such stacked lineups. It might be hard to get off the board, like you said. I'm definitely not going to be looking for those Ricky Seals-Jones type guys. But let's talk a little bit about FanDuel too, because the quarterback position is much more likely to be the highest scoring on FanDuel with the 0.5 PPR. That just makes it a lot harder for a receiver to be the highest scoring player. So does that make you more likely to go to Watson or Mahomes in the captain spot there?
So I will agree that they are more likely, but people overestimate, at least last year, essentially they overestimated it. We saw in general that the field played quarterback in captain significantly more often than he actually showed up as the winning player. Running back got it, like was clearly the number 2 because you're getting more touchdown equity with running backs typically. But receiver, despite having a less overall chance compared to DraftKings, we can get you that 100-yard bonus, gives you obviously that juicy PPR. Receiver still was used less in the captain spot by the field than they actually showed up in the optimal lineup. So I think in terms of like building like a median projection lineup, yeah, you would want quarterback in your captain more often than not. However, based on like tournament strategy and how people are playing the quarterback position, I'm typically looking to get mostly running back, but receiver in the same way. Whereas on DraftKings, I'm pretty much fine with either running backs or receivers. Running backs is where I'd be going much more heavy, especially in a game like this where I love me some Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So for me, like I love Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So for me, in FanDuel specifically, that's probably a lot of where I'm going to go. If you're into David Johnson, he makes sense too. I just think that people, I mean, the numbers bear it out. You can find this. Brandon Gadul is like one of the only guys to get to write about this because he has access to the hidden secret data from FanDuel. And he the numbers are very clear. The quarterback is just overused at captain relative to how often it hits.
That's definitely an interesting take. I'm a little skeptical. I think quarterbacks are pretty good captains. Of course, it depends a little bit on the slate. And I did mention that like it depends on the quarterback. If there's one receiver that's really outstanding, that does hurt their odds. But one point I agree with is that running backs are undervalued at the captain spot. And that's because the points they get aren't shared with any other player. So like they get that 8 points for rushing TD of 20 yards. No one else is scoring on that play, but a captain quarterback, they're giving up 10 points to another player on that play. So that's definitely something to consider. So running backs like Helaire, like David Johnson for the Texans, they could be intriguing captain picks. Now let's talk a little bit about these guys because they weren't on the Texans and Chiefs last year. So what's the one roster change that you're really honing in on for these teams today?
So I guess there's two big ones. I'm actually going to pivot off of Clyde Edwards-Helaire and go to the absence of DeAndre Hopkins, because I don't want to go too hard on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think Will Fuller is going to end up being one of the best plays of the entire season. Like when you look at season long, he just seems so undervalued. He is the most efficient target for Deshaun Watson. I believe like a 10.8 or more adjusted yards per attempt when he targets him. And in college, he was a guy who was like dominant, even market share numbers, which has kind of been always the concern for Will Fuller, is that like, oh, well, he's a role player essentially. I don't think that is necessarily going to be the case. I'm not sure who else they're going to throw it to on this team. Brandon Cooks comes in at, well, it seems to be well under 100% health. Randall Cobb is a guy who doesn't really profile to be not only a dominant player in terms of market share numbers, but I don't expect him to operate any similar way to Will Fuller, kind of the opposite type of player. And I've just been fooled too many times by Kenny Stills. I just can't do it with him. So I think Will Fuller is probably, especially I talk about captains typically come from his price range there. He's a guy that I think makes a lot of sense in captain. I just want to get him in all my lineups.
I like it. I think Will Fuller, he was one of our favorite season-long picks too. And
yes,
like it's like the situation couldn't be better. You know, there's no concerns about his health right now. We're only concerned about the one game, so we're not worried about that. And then you have the biggest receiving threat for the Texans being traded over the offseason. That's going to lead a lot of targets to go to new guys. And Will Fuller is the number one guy, unquestionably. As you mentioned, Brandon Cooks, he's a little bit hobbled up today, so maybe that's even a knock against him and in Fuller's favor. Kenny Stills is going to be a big loser here because last year he was starting due to a lot of injuries. He's basically the wide receiver fourth for the Texans this year. Now, one interesting thing about this slate is DeAndre Washington, or Dwayne Washington. I keep getting those guys mixed up. But anyway, when this slate was priced, this D Washington, he was the backup running back in Kansas City. Since then, he's been passed by Darrell Williams and Darwin Thompson for the Chiefs. And of course, we have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's the workhorse back for the Chiefs. But we haven't seen these three all together, and they're all active today. Thompson, Darrell Williams, and Helaire. So how do you think this workload is going to be split up by the Chiefs today?
Yeah, so all throughout the latter half of camp, there was just consistently reports that Darrell Williams had taken over as number two back, which obviously brought to be true. And this is DeAndre Washington. Dwayne Washington was the Saints' backup and role player, maybe like a special teams player for the Saints at some point, maybe the Lions, if memory serves me. Yes, this was DeAndre Washington, no longer on the active roster. I think we will at least see a between the tackles role for Darrell Williams, who's like a big dude, probably weighs similar to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is like 5'9", but thick. Darrell Williams is a big dude with pass catching upside, and I could see him getting like a sneaky goal line role. He's a guy who they at least trust with the ball in his hands, and that would really be where he makes his money. And not only that, it's going to be kind of easy to make his money. Super cheap on this slate, and I'm surprised we don't have him higher owned. I think he has so much value if he does end up having like a true 50-50 split, which is what was talked about by the beat reporters, that early in the season we could see a committee. If you get like the 1B or even just the straight up 2 on the Chiefs for his price, he's a guy that I think makes so much sense right now on a slate where I also want to get up to guys like Travis Kelce, Mahomes, Watson, all these guys. Definitely.
Darrell Williams is so underpriced today. I think sub 2K, and the value on him is crazy good. So he's going to play today for sure, and that's definitely one of the top value picks. Helaire, he's definitely, a first-round pick running back. That's unusual to start with, and then you plop him in like pretty much the best team in the league. So, are you buying into all the hype that made him a first-round draft pick today?
Yeah, I didn't love him. He wasn't a mega producer until his final year. And when you play with that nuts Joe Burrow offense, it's probably pretty easy to be a productive running back. But honestly, I don't care. Big running back doesn't matter vibes for me, because you put Damian Williams was also he literally couldn't beat out practice squad level players 4 touches on the Miami Dolphins. It was like the freaking Dolphins. And then we see him turn into one of the best fantasy backs in the league. It's not because he was great. It's because he's played on the freaking Chiefs. So I think we're going to see, especially the one thing I want to see, or I hope we see from Clyde Edwards-Helaire, is his pass catching game, but specifically that sick wheel route that Damian Williams would just fly out into the flats and then go like break open because they have so many playmakers to cover. So I think that's probably the bulk of where we'll see him, especially in a fantasy relevant sense, is we will see him get pass catching work in this backfield. And that's really good coming from Mahomes. He's been incredibly efficient. He's efficient everywhere. He's efficient targeting any player, but he's been efficient targeting running backs too. That gives him more touchdown upside as well. So I think we'll probably see a 50-50, a pretty even split in terms of carries, but I would expect Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who went, I think, over like 50 receptions in his final college season. I would expect him to get the bulk of the receiving work out of the backfield. And that's probably where you're betting on if you want him tonight.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, he can definitely rack up points pretty much anyway, running, receiving. But as you're saying, if you're expecting him to play 3 downs every drive, like probably not going to happen. And then let's talk a little bit about the other move. Like the DeAndre Hopkins trade, of course, made David Johnson come to the Texans. And they also got a 2nd-round pick, I believe. But I'm not sure like if that trade was because the Texans just love David Johnson, but I see it and they're like they have Duke Johnson as the RB2. Duke Johnson just never plays that much. Like it doesn't matter who's in, who's out. They've never made him like the lead back. Last year, Lamar Miller wasn't very good, and Duke Johnson still couldn't really get more of a role. So I'm just thinking that it's a weird situation because David Johnson's strength also is catching passes from the backfield, but that's Duke Johnson's role too. So I'm just like not really sure how this is going to work, but what's your take?
Yeah, so last year, I love Duke Johnson, and every coach that has him just seems to be like, nope, he's just a 3rd down, pass blocking back or whatever. And I do think that is almost certainly like, we have 4 or 5 years of data on Duke Johnson. I don't believe that even if David Johnson is washed, like I don't believe no matter how bad he is, they're not going to get him on the field, especially between the tackles. Big dude and really fast, or at least he was in his prime, his very short-lived prime. But I will say that Duke Johnson's best games consistently came in terms of the volume he got in games that the Texans lost. Like a majority of his most run total games and target total games came in games they lost. Because, it makes sense. They're losing to get him on the field. Not only can he get targets, but just generally, like, coaches love running 3rd and 12. Give it up. You're going to get 8 yards if you give the Duke Johnson up the middle from the shotgun. That's 8 yards, baby. And that's still a 4th and 4. But coaches love running that play. And Duke Johnson, that was like, that and just getting catches out of the backfield were his bread and butter when the Texans were losing specifically. If you're playing a scenario, because like we talked about before the show, like would you do double defense? I don't know, man. No one's going to own it. If you're playing for a scenario where the Texans have a lead or very in contention, Duke Johnson makes 0 sense. I think if you play for like the Chiefs beating the spread even worse than it is, Duke Johnson like very much moves up the ladder. And I actually kind of think that is my take on this game. So I have a decent amount of Duke Johnson right now.
That's it's an interesting play. I mean, I have Duke Johnson a decent amount too, and it's like if they're behind, which most likely would be the case, since they're about 20 to 25% chance to win this game, Duke Johnson could see more work than your average Texans game. So that definitely works. And also, people have been talking about David Johnson's back and how he just wasn't good last year. I have no idea what to make of that because they traded Hopkins for him. So I'm like, he can't be that bad, right? But let's talk a little bit about the running game here. So we have David Johnson and Duke Johnson. And is there any other Texans running back you'd expect to play this game? Because I didn't really see anyone that.
I don't think so. Wasn't it? I don't know if he's on the roster, but they did get. I think it was Tywan Jones. They got in on that one. Whatever their first playoff game was, he had the long catch and run or whatever. I don't think they have anybody who does that this game, and especially if you were a guy who I can't imagine they get a 3rd pass catching running back involved. So for me, I don't have much interest in this team as actual running back, between the tackles rushing production. So yeah, I wouldn't be too much interested in anyone anyways. Is there? I don't think there's anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see anyone who's probably going to play. Karan Higdon, I think he's a rookie. He's in the player pool and he got waived, so he's not even on the roster anymore. Yeah, so really if you have David Johnson in fantasy, you got to be pretty confident about that because they don't really have much depth at running back. So you got both of these guys, David Johnson and Duke Johnson, seem to be in spots where they're going to get a lot of snaps. Now on the other side, we talked a little bit about Helaire and Gerald Williams. Do you think Darwin Thompson is going to be in the mix here? Like, I assume mostly he's going to play special teams, but he's like 5'8", 200 pounds, so very small running back. And I'm kind of thinking, my thought process is this: like, they waived DeAndre Washington, sent him to the practice squad. And by the way, it doesn't mention that on DraftKings or FanDuel, so make sure to not pick DeAndre Washington. But I'm kind of thinking maybe that was an endorsement of both Gerald Williams and Darwin Thompson, because they kept him on the roster. So do you think Darwin Thompson could steal some third downs in this game?
I think it's not impossible to believe, especially like when you look at, that's exactly, you mentioned, like, he profiles like a guy who would specifically play on third downs, but given just how little work he saw last season on a team that was so banged up at running back, like, that tells me, in my opinion, all I need to know is that, like, this team was without Damian Williams for multiple games. LaShawn McCoy, like dusty old LaShawn McCoy, was getting the bulk of the touches at points, and they were still like, no, we cannot at any situation get Darwin Thompson involved in the offense. So I think you're probably right that his role is on as a special teams player. I think they told us last year what they want to do with him, and maybe it says something that they kept him over DeAndre Washington, but I think that's more just an endorsement of probably Darrell Williams, who supposedly, like I said, had a really good camp. Yeah,
Darrell Williams, definitely, he's kind of a top value play today because of how much his role has changed since these prices released. So he's 1,800 on DraftKings, 6K on FanDuel. I ended up with him a ton on both sites because of that price, and you can just create a completely stacked line behind that. So I'm kind of thinking the ownership's going to be high on Darrell Williams tonight. Our ownership projection on the site, 21% at flex, 2% at captain. Does that scare you off a little bit?
I would actually project it to be higher. I'm like 100% on board with him. We talk about it, like, there's just so much ambiguity and it all skews towards upside. So he might end up being like my highest owned player of the night for that reason, because if he gets a 40% share or a 30% share of Kansas City running back touches, those are the good running back touches, and gets a handful of targets, like, that is so free money. And no, that ownership isn't awfully high for a guy who I think could be like a free square on this. Like, it's just such a bad price. That ownership seems still low to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, like, so many people probably have never heard of him, and like it's hard to pick a guy in fantasy that you've never heard of. Also, I thought Damian Williams opted out when they see D Williams. Definitely. And I think I might fade him due to ownership just because he's like the optimizer play. When I plugged in Fantasy Cruncher and I just started crunching, I got him like 100% pretty much. So I don't feel good about it because I think he's a good play, but you gotta take some stands that might be one I take. And okay, so let's talk about the Chiefs passing game here, because there's a lot of options. Let's start with the bottom. So we got McCole Hardman. He's a guy that people are kind of interested to see, like, if he can take another step this year. And then Demarcus Robinson, who's a wide receiver 4. Like, I saw a prop on him for 18 yards, which would be high enough to maybe be a GPP dart, but I'm not really buying it. So are you going to take any shots on some of these longer shots for the Chiefs?
Yeah, for me, I would be interested. I am interested in both Sammy Watkins and McCole Hardman. I think our ownership has a significant ownership edge for Sammy Watkins. So based on that alone, like, I'm confident in our ownership being more accurate than my personal projections of what happens to these two. So that just leads me immediately, just on strategy alone, to go McCole Hardman. And he's a guy who was so incredibly efficient last year. Like, he produced touchdowns at a stupid rate. So I think we know he has playmaking ability. He was drafted as like a pseudo Tyreek Hill replacement. This is when we thought Tyreek Hill might not be on the Chiefs at the start of the year, and that's why they took him as early as they did. So I love his playmaking ability. I think Sammy Watkins, I see why people are on him over Hardman. Watkins played, I think, like over 80% of the snaps to close out their playoff run, while Hardman was just this role player. But he was a young guy I think he played wide receiver for only 2 to 3 years. He's a guy who was like a position switch in college. It makes sense that he would take a step forward as a wide receiver and could completely split or just take over that second role opposite Tyreek Hill. So for me, I'm going to go with ownership. And I do think there's like a lot of upside reasons to also just go with Hardman anyways.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see today, like if the roles have changed, because Watkins, as you mentioned, he played a ton last year, but not like the best efficiency at all. He caught 58% passes. McCole Hardman averaged 20 yards per catch. So that kind of tells me that maybe McCole Hardman's like that long, deep threat that's not going to get hit on many passes, but they can be like really big plays. So he's kind of a GPP play, but in Showdown, I'm happy enough fading those guys too. So I'm leaning Watkins because he gets more points from PPR, just getting targeted more, but I don't feel really great about either one. Now Kelsey and Hill, they're pretty cheap tonight, all things considered. I was able to get them pretty easily into rosters. Hill is 10.4 and Kelsey is 9.2K on DraftKings. So pretty good plays. Are you stacking up this Chiefs offense with the passing players?
Yeah, I think like as much as I'm trying to find ownership edges, I just can't see a world. I still project that the Chiefs end up beating the Texans pretty cleanly. So yes, I am looking to stack this side of the ball. And I think one thing I was looking at Showdown winning lineups is that we don't see enough, at least like disproportionately 5-to-1 onslaughts win a handful more than they're actually used. So, and if the Chiefs go out and beat the brakes off of Houston, that would be the perfect scenario to do it. So that's especially a way that like, if I think like you like Watkins more, and I do think like the median projection is better for him, I just think like ownership is maybe why you get off. I don't think a 5-1 onslaught is going to be as popular as it should be. It wasn't at all last year. So the data bears out that 5-1 is probably a very solid play. And that's how you could get unique if you want to play like I like Watkins as a projection play. His ownership scares me. His ownership doesn't scare me as much as I know I have a unique build. So I'd probably go like a Tyreek Hill captain over Travis Kelce. But I don't know, it's semantics. Both of them are great players. We know Travis Kelce has crazy upside just like Tyreek Hill does. We just see a little less, pretty infrequently, that tight ends end up being the winning captain. But Travis Kelce isn't your average tight end. So I'm fine with, I hate to say, like, I don't want to play a tight end except Travis Kelce. So for me, I think either of them are fine the captain, especially if you go with like a crazy Chiefs onslaught.
Man, I better go swap off some Darren Fells here and get Kelce. But yeah, I mean, the 5-1 stack is really effective. It makes a lot of sense because in football there's a pretty fixed number of plays, anywhere from about 120 to 130 plays on average, and only one of the teams can be playing on the field at once on offense. So if that skews heavily for one team, then you're going to end up with 5 players from a team that's going to have a lot of yardage and touchdowns, and the other team's not going to do much. So I think there's a lot of merit to going to 5-1. One thing I think when I was crunching today, I saw a lot of 5 stacks of the Chiefs. So I'm thinking the 5 stack of the Texans might be real low owned. Now, how are you feeling about the receivers and quarterback? Because they're not going to project nearly as well, being projected for 22 as opposed to 31 points. But we know these guys have talent. So how are you handling this situation?
Yeah, like I talked about, I love Will Fuller. I think the like PPR style, like the very specific to DraftKings style options, both Randall Cobb and Duke Johnson for me are actually really cheap. They're both like just above 4K, I think like 42 and 48 maybe. Those are guys that if I'm going with the Texans side, which I think is one way to get different, is to just throw out the Vegas numbers. And if Vegas is wrong on this slate, it's a print fest if you go with the Texans stack. So I don't mind that. And these are the guys I'd be looking at. I'd be looking at Will Fuller and captain because I freaking love Will Fuller, running it back with Deshaun Watson. Or I think it's possible that also just they win in a shootout. Maybe they don't necessarily like beat the brakes off Kansas City. Kansas City doesn't have a bad game, but like the Texans are a great team in their own right. If they end up winning, I think that's maybe, you don't have to get super crazy with like even 5-1. You can go 4-2 Deshaun Watson, and you like just stack up a bunch of, you can get 4 basically Houston receivers, quarterback, whatever. And I want to ask you mentioned Darren Fells. I actually think Darren Fells would be like a really sneaky play. He had 2 double touchdown games last year. I don't even mind Jordan Akins either, but Fells is like 6'7". He's basically a blocker until they get in the red zone. Then he's like 34 and still a matchup nightmare in specific games. So I think he's like another guy that would make a really great Houston Texans stack.
I like it. I think Fells could go under the radar because his average production last year wasn't great. But Houston did show a propensity to run 2 tight end sets a decent amount. I have all their snap counts from last year where I get on PFF what percentage of passing plays do they run routes. And there are several games where Akins 51, Fells 76, Akins 61, Fells 61. And that could even go up now that they don't have Hopkins. So taking these tight ends for Houston does have merit. Now, it's interesting because like these guys are not fantasy assets. Like to a big extent, Akins averaged 5.6 points per game last year. Fells was at 7.2. So do you think the situation could be even better this year for them?
They did. I don't know how much, but they lost Jordan Thomas. They have like a very thin, I think like Kale Waring is their third tight end, a dude I've never heard of. And for me, I think especially maybe not on the year as a whole, but this game would be perfect. Like you would love to see them trailing. And I do think you pointed out, so they run a lot of 2 tight end and they lose one of the most used receivers in the NFL in DeAndre Hopkins, and Brandon Cooks nicked up this game. This would be like the ideal game for them to throw a lot into tight end sets. So yes, I do agree that like, yes, things are looking up for their tight ends relative to last year. I don't think they're like consistent fantasy players, but this is the perfect time to get like just deep receiving weapons on the Texans, who are projected to have to throw a lot just to even come close to competing with Patrick Mahomes.
Nice, man. Yeah, I like it. I think these tight ends could be pretty sneaky tonight. We got Fells at 8% ownership, Akins at 12%. Akins is kind of a pump play I'm leaning on at 3,200 to maybe pivot from Darrell Williams. Mm-hmm. But of course, Darrell Williams is one I like too. I probably will limit these punt plays to 1 per lineup. Otherwise, you're going to overlap a ton with other people because you're just cramming all the like best players in. Do you have any rules for that, or how do you do it?
Yeah, I agree. I would limit myself to playing few punt plays. Like basically when I was looking at the winning lineup data, you get a pretty linear distribution of both ownership and like just salary cap you spend, like min-maxing essentially, trying to get like 4 studs and 2 punt plays. Not only doesn't work, but I think ends up getting you on some chalkier stud plays. Yeah, I would limit myself to 1 specifically, and definitely not go like Akins Fells, because 2 tight ends, it was exceedingly rare. I think I saw it like once last year in a winning lineup. So would limit myself to 1. I think both Akins led the team in tight end targets. Fells was like up there in red zone targets. I like both these guys, but I wouldn't be playing, definitely not both of them too, and just generally not playing that many low priced options, especially on a slate. I don't think you have to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the salary cap doesn't really push you into those builds anyway. So one of the ways you can save salary is with special teams guys. So let's talk about them real quick. Now, kickers, I feel like they're always priced really cheap on DraftKings. Fairbairn is 3,600 and Butker is 3,800. And these kickers usually average 8-10 points a game. Butker was at 10 points last year. Fairbairn was at 7, more than 2 points per dollar, which is really good. But the upside's kind of capped. So how are you handling kickers tonight in your lineups?
Yeah, so in lineups that I like would basically project on the basis that this game hits the under, actually in kickers make a ton of sense. But like you said, they have their upside cap specifically because they just literally don't have access to touchdowns. That is a play you take off the board for them. So if you're betting the under, or if you're even just building lineups, you're not betting it, you're just building lineups on the basis that the under has potential and no one is sort of playing that strategy. that's when kickers make sense. I still wouldn't like double kicker. Double kickers like very infrequently showing up, and it's typically in games that not only hit the under but like are disgusting ugly games. I don't think you need to go like that far off the board. I think just betting the under would be like a contrarian enough strategy. You don't need to bet that it's an ugly game. So I think one kicker makes sense. I don't really have a preference between the two. I guess I would just go with the higher team total kicker. So I would go Butker. But yeah, kickers like every single slate, DraftKings underprice is relative. They just always turn up with like a good points per dollar value.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's a good point you made. Where like this team or the over under is 54, so a lot of people are probably thinking this is going to be a high scoring game. But this is football. You can't always know the game script ahead of time. So playing maybe a slugfest where there's a bunch of field goals is a good strategy. And that leads us to defense, because defense has a big anti-correlation with the opposing offense, obviously. But it's one thing where, like, if it is a low-scoring game, then defense could easily show up in the winning lineup. Let's see, the Chiefs defense is definitely the one I'd prefer today, like, because I mean, like, that's no shocker, but I have some Texans as well. DK only, FanDuel doesn't have them, but did you end up with any of the defenses today?
Yeah, I'd only be playing KCD, but I actually think Kansas City defense is like a really, really good play. They're so cheap and it gives you access to those high-priced guys, but I don't think they'll be like, it's not like you're paying down for Darrell Williams and then going high-priced guys to build the world's chalkiest lineup. I think it'll be like, it's a great way to pivot off of Darrell Williams specifically. And yeah, the Kansas City defense, despite Deshaun Watson being a 6'6" player, he takes sacks at a crazy high rate, way higher than Patrick Mahomes, and he throws interceptions at a higher rate than Patrick Mahomes. He's a guy who could easily give it up, and especially like when you see defenses at their ceiling, it can often happen in high-scoring games because basically a defensive ceiling is created by touchdowns, and touchdowns are touchdowns are just kind of mostly random from a defense. But you get more pulls to the slot machine when Deshaun Watson has to drop back 60 times and is taking sacks at a crazy rate, which he generally does. So for me, yeah, that's I think both, if you were betting like an under or an over, just basically getting a defense against Deshaun Watson makes some sense. Although if you were, say, going with a Texans heavy lineup, that's obviously I wouldn't be going any KCD there.
Yeah, one of the things about defense, this is something I've just kind of noticed, and not something I've really studied, but I feel like games often end in those desperation plays that turn into like pick sixes or sack fumbles for touchdowns and stuff like that. So I feel like the defense makes sense in that 5-1 stack that you're talking about too. So is this something you're trying to get in more when you have like a stack versus if you're just picking players from both teams?
Yeah, if I were running like a 3-3 lineup, I don't think defense would be nearly as much priority. And I have a lot of the 5-1 KC with the defense, and of course you might get that double dip with Tyreek Hill punt return or whatever.
All right, so you mentioned double defense earlier. That's just too crazy, right?
I mean, maybe you go the full, I want to be the only person in a field of 300,000 or whatever to have this lineup. That's how I build EV. If that's your strategy, then sure, go double defense. I can't see this game hitting the under by a large enough margin that two defenses make it. Two defenses is exceedingly rare anyways, and it almost exclusively happens in games with like way low final totals. I can't see this game having an incredibly low, like sub 40. I can't see it being 21-10 or whatever. So for me, one defense, Kansas City for me is where I'm going. A double defense, I'm not that crazy.
I think KC defense is really good today. They're actually one of my highest owned plays on DraftKings. So I'm hoping that maybe we get some pick sixes or something. I also have a ton of Mahomes, of course, but the guy I'm getting to most on Texans is Watson. I mean, like, you got to pick one player from both teams, obviously. And in a low-scoring game, the highest-scoring player from a team is probably going to be the quarterback because they rack up points, just kind of running, getting yardage, even if there aren't touchdowns. So I'm thinking maybe Watson running back with 5 Chiefs could be a decent lineup. But who are your highest owned players today looking like?
Yeah, so KC defense specifically is one of my highest owned players. I'm on Darrell Williams, man. I think the value is good enough, and maybe like I'm just selling like our ownership projections don't think he's going to be stupid owned. So I think like the value ends up being worth it there. Those are two guys I'm on. I have a lot of Clyde Edwards-Helaire captain too. One thing I know, I don't think that rules you out. Do you think that rules you out from going double running back? Double running back's not like crazy infrequent to happen, but I would imagine it's incredibly low owned. I think that's something that like intuitively wouldn't make sense, but in the winning lineups, it actually does show up. So I think double defense, you could go double defense on the other side too. I'm not on David Johnson though, so I'm not doing that. So I think double defense, I'll probably be well over double running back. I'll be well over the field on the KC side there. And I especially think that helps me feel more comfortable eating. It's still a lot of Darrell Williams chalk.
I like it. I think running backs are undervalued relative to their projection because, as I mentioned earlier, it's like they score points by themselves. And that has tremendous value for them being one of the highest scores of the slate. So I like the double running back. I even see some laps I have with 3 running backs, which is maybe overdoing it, but it could happen. How do you feel about defense or kicker or captain? I mean, I don't know. There was a Lions game last year where Matt Prater was in the winning captain slot. And in your article, I'm sure you mentioned that. So
I did.
I mean, like the only way that happens is if you just need like 5 different high-priced guys, right? Like otherwise it's almost impossible.
Yeah, so defense was kind of the same way. When you get defense at captain, it's basically just like this game, both of the defense and kicker, although it's hard to really pull much data from one kicker making the captain lineup. But defense was whenever you see defenses, and especially at captain, but even just generally when you see defenses, it's because they're low scoring games. So I can't see this game getting to that point where like a defense opens up maybe the Chiefs come out and just so badly beat them. But I just think no matter what happens, the game comes down to being an offensive game. So I can't get any defense at captain.
Yeah, I think it might not be as crazy as people think. Like, obviously.
You think so?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of Chiefs defense at captain. This is mostly a play I'm making in millionaire maker lineups because, like, the thing is the number of lineups you can make are very limited. On FanDuel, I was able to make like 3,000 like lineups that were decent. On DraftKings, I crunched 100,000 lineups, which is ridiculous. But I ended up with 6,000 unique lineups. So I'm like going for teams that are on the lower end of these dupes for the millionaire maker could be a big strategy tonight. And the chance I have for the Chiefs being the highest scorer today is on my free article, the top showdown plays. I have it at 1.2%. But there's also the possibility they're just cheap enough to fit in the plays you need for the rest of Kansas City. So it is how I'm rolling today, but I don't feel real good about it. But the thing is, like, you're either splitting with a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you have a lineup that's stacked. So what's your approach to like the millionaire maker versus like a smaller field tournament?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you said that's a lineup that makes sense in the milli maker, especially like, yeah, you lose so much equity by immediately locking yourself into a lineup that you're going to chop, 350, 500 ways. There's so many freaking people. And I don't think like a double touchdown game is that far out of the realm of possibility. Like this is actually probably a game you would predict it to be more likely for a double touchdown game from the Kansas City defense. So yeah, I think that like it's not impossible. And also like if you project them to be the optimal, like if you simulate it and they're the optimal captain at 1% of the time, I would imagine they go owned at captain under that. So like that is just a plus EV move, even if it's gross. Like just take the plus EV.
Yeah, hoping that works out, but probably won't. But that's why we take these long shot tournaments. So it's fun. Donnie in chat, he's saying lower scoring game today than people think. Oh, it sounds like both of us are building for that. So hopefully that happens. But I'm also excited for if it's an exciting offensive game too. So Callie says Butker getting 10 regardless. I mean, I've seen games where I remember the Kansas City kicker won people slates a few years ago with like 6 field goals or something. This is back on FanDuel where you had the kicker. So you never count them out.
Gross.
All right. So we got 5 minutes left. Let's talk about some final thoughts. People are probably putting in their last lineup. So overall, what do you think the most important thing is for tonight's slate?
For me, it would be finding ways to get unique with Darrell Williams. And it is whether you choose to go with him, you have to get a bit extra off the board, or if you choose to not go with him, you've already done it. So that's sort of where I'm trying to like lab out how I would want to attack this. For me, it's going with Darrell Williams and trying to get unique with like Clyde Captain. I think combined with Darrell would be interesting. Also a 5-1 with like KC defense and Clyde. Like I think double running back makes a lot of sense to run it back. You could run it back with Solo Watson, like you said, which I think, like in theory, people would say doesn't make sense, but he's also a guy who can do it with his legs. And that is something we've seen when you get either a captain quarterback or a solo quarterback in the flex positions. That's so often how they do it is they like you said, they score without helping their other players on their team. So if he ends up putting in a rushing touchdown and just the Texans don't do anything outside of that, that would make a lot of sense for him to be the one versus your 5 KC Onslaught.
I like it. Yeah, I think it's like you just need there to be a game script that makes sense. There are a lot of lineups you can make that don't make any sense. Like if you have Kelsey and Tyreek Hill, but you don't have Mahomes. Like I know Mahomes maybe gets injured or something is possible, but even then you need the backup quarterback. So make sure like the lineup you have has a sensible way to be the winning lineup, because with so many correlations between the players in football, it's definitely possible to make a lineup that has like basically no shot of winning. All receivers is probably the worst lineup you can make. So that's definitely something I'm looking at tonight. Now, one other thing, I know last year Ben Rasa, he does a lot of our NFL shows. He's always cautioning against getting too fancy and trying to play players that are off the board. Now, is there anyone like that's just dirt cheap other than Darrell Williams you'd consider rostering?
I really don't have like any interest. I think the only way is he's not quite dirt cheap, but I think you could like there's a non-zero chance you could go up to like a DeMarcus Robinson. He's not the same price as Darrell Williams, but I think that would be one way that, especially like if you were to take him, I don't know, if you took him over Tyreek Hill, that would be like the nut leverage. So I think that would be interesting. And he had that one crazy game last year. I don't remember when it was. But he actually had a nuts game, and he's a guy who I think would probably I think he's probably a guy they trust to get on the field, especially if someone gets injured. So I think he makes some non-zero sense. I don't love him, but he'd be way low owned relative to like if he just takes the field over one of these guys. Like if Sammy Watkins gets injured and they're like, we played McCole Hardman 40 snaps, we're not getting him in anymore. DeMarcus Robinson takes the field for like half the game in a shootout. That could make sense. I think he's a guy who actually makes sense relative to his ownership.
I like it. That's the guy that he's gonna play tonight. That makes a logical sense to have him 2,200 on DraftKings. One guy I gotta mention, because Byron Pringle actually was this guy last year, because I think Tyreek Hill or Sammy Watkins got injured. He put up 25 points in week 5. Of course, all of us watching probably lost money that week because Byron Pringle is actually 1% owned on this slate, right? On that slate. So like this guy that probably wasn't going to play was 1% owned. And that, even though I lost all my money that day, it was like, there's no way he's cracking the winning lineup 1% of the time. That's just absurd, right? And
yeah, exactly. I think that was like a massive injury game for the team. And yeah, so like you said, it's like he worked out that time, but he probably doesn't actually that was a very plus outcome. That's not like, oh, well, sometimes a Byron Pringle just happens. I don't think relative to how often it happens, he's not a guy worth playing.
Definitely. Got a question in chat. CJ says, can you play Watson and Chiefs D together in the same lineup? I would say yes, because I mean, you just get 1 pick 6, and that's like -2 for Watson. It doesn't really make it so he's not going to be in the winning lineup. Greg then replies, why would you? So I mean, that's also true. Guys, we're locked right now. I guess maybe there's 30 seconds. I wanted to wait until lock to tell you about this promo, because we've crashed the site before from promos that are too good. But if you use the promo code Mahomes, you get a weekly pass for Awesemo Plus for $5. So if you don't already have a membership, make sure to head over right now, because it expires in 20 minutes to sign up for this weekly pass. Try it out. We got the projections, ownership, And my big thing is it's all about like the odds. If you're competing against really sharp people every day because there's so much money in fantasy sports, we're all competing for millions of dollars every single slate. You got to think like the top players are thinking. They're not looking at trying to figure out who the best plays are every single week because that's easy to do. Like everyone's building lineups like that. It's all about how do you play the odds and work them in your favor. That's kind of how I've been building out the tools where our top stacks gives you the odds that each team will be the highest scoring stack of the week versus their ownership. For Showdown, I have this top Showdown plays. These are really essential tools if you want to outsmart the field. So make sure to use that promo code Mahomes for the $5 NFL weekly. Thanks everyone for watching, supporting this, YouTube. You can hit the thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed, hit the subscribe and the notification bell. Kyle, what are you expecting to see today in this game, and any final thoughts?
I'm expecting to see a slight under where we make some money. Let's get a little under. Nothing crazy. No double defense. No double kicker. Let's see a slight under, or maybe they hit it on the back of like pick six or something. So I think in terms of what my lineups would tell you we're expecting to see, I would expect to see maybe the game hits the under, and I think Chiefs Onslaught probably hits in that scenario. So those are my thoughts, and I like how like you lay out the approaches, that it's hardly about picking the plays. I thought about this when you said like Tyreek Hill versus Travis Kelce. I was like, I don't know, they're both good plays. Like I'm just trying to like build good, mostly non-dupe lineups. They're both fine. So yeah, that's the next level, and I hope we see some of that tonight.
Definitely, yeah. So it'll be really exciting if one of us wins $1 million. Definitely wishing for that. More likely, we'll all split it, so that'd be fun too. But yeah, maybe if we could get a 21-17 game, that'd be great. So, All right, guys, good luck in all your lineups tonight. And make sure to check us out tomorrow morning. We're gonna have another NFL strategy show and lots more content on Awesemo.com. So, thanks everyone for watching.